They gave away champagne and laughed like royalty, right before the lawyer read my name as the sole heir to a $37 million empire. The room? Dead silent. And for the first time in my life, they finally saw me. Hi, I'm Ivania Blackwell, the invisible daughter. The one everyone forgot, until it was too late. Have you ever been in a room full of people who smiled to your face, but erased you the moment you turned away? This is a story of betrayal, legacy, and the quiet power of reclaiming your worth. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like the outsider in your own family? What would you do if the very people who dismissed you had to watch you rise? Let's go back to the moment it all began, when I stepped into that mansion, unaware that everything was about to change. The clink of champagne glasses rang through the room like tiny, polished bells. My father's voice cut clear above the elegant hum of conversation, smiling out toward the sea of pressed suits and glittering jewelry. "To all our perfect children," he said, raising his glass with practiced grace. "All of them." The crowd responded with light applause and obligatory smiles, but my name, Ivania, was never spoken. I didn't flinch, I didn't shift in my seat or look for someone else's reaction. I had long since stopped expecting anything from moments like these. That night, the Blackwell estate glittered like something out of a catalog. Warm string lights arched over the garden, casting golden halos over the heads of gathered guests. The Vow Renewal party of Orville and Lorene Blackwell was the social event of the season. One part marital celebration, one part public relations campaign for a family who lived by image and illusion. I stood near the edge of the dance floor, 1 foot half on the grass, half off the marble path, wearing a muted navy dress that my mother had called sensible. I wasn't in any of the pre-arranged family portraits. In the seating chart, I'd been placed at table 14, wedged behind a column near the kitchen doors, where every server's shout echoed as they passed. Earlier, I had arrived alone. No one greeted me. The usher had blinked at my name and double-checked the list before leading me to my chair like I was a +1 who'd slipped through security. I had helped plan this, chosen the florist, designed the monogram on the invitation. I knew every candle on this table, every name on every envelope. But tonight, I was invisible, by design. I was stirring my drink with the tiny gold stirrer when Cressa floated over like a vulture in silk. "Oh, Evie," she purred, "you picked navy again. Brave choice in this lighting." I smiled at her politely. "Good to see you too, Cressa." She didn't stay long, just long enough to look me over, like inspecting a project she'd discarded long ago, and was relieved to see hadn't flourished in her absence. As she turned to leave, she added with a titter, "Well, I suppose someone had to keep the shadows company tonight." I watched her go. She didn't notice. When the toast began, I stood at the back, just close enough to hear my father's words, but far enough to feel their weight land everywhere but on me. To Merrick, for graduating with distinction from Yale Law. To Cressa, who continues to inspire us with her leadership. To Zephyr, the tech whiz who's keeping us all young. And to the rest of the family who make us so proud. I waited. "And to all our perfect children," he finished. That was it. My spoon clinked against the side of my untouched glass. I didn't cry. I didn't flee the scene. I didn't even shift my weight. I simply placed my napkin on the table, quietly excused myself, and walked across the garden path, my heels muted against the stone. The light seemed too warm, too soft, as I moved past clusters of conversation. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked where I was going. They never did. Out beyond the hedges, the air grew cooler. I stood under a tree near the back edge of the property where the music sounded like it came from another world. There, I allowed myself to exhale, not cry, just breathe. Then I heard footsteps, A man in a dark coat stepped from the side path. I recognized him faintly. One of Grandfather Edward's old staff, the kind that stayed long after their contracts ended out of something deeper than money. "Miss Blackwell?" he asked. I straightened. "Yes?" He held out a small, wax-sealed envelope. "He asked me to give you this, tonight, after the toast." I took it, fingertips trembling. The seal was his, a tiny lion etched into red wax, my grandfather's mark. I looked up, but the man was already walking away. The envelope was thick, and the paper inside was weighty. One single folded sheet. I opened it carefully under the dim light of a garden lamp. The handwriting was unmistakably his. And there, in slanted ink, it said, "Let them laugh. The truth is almost here." That's when something inside me stirred, something that had been still for too long, something that wasn't hunger or sadness or even resentment. It was the first flicker of something else entirely. Resolve. As I refolded the paper, I heard laughter erupt from the direction of the patio. Another toast, another round of applause, another moment I wasn't meant to witness. That was fine, because the next time I stood in that room, I wouldn't be invisible. I'd be undeniable. The Blackwell mansion had never felt colder than it did that morning. Despite the sun streaming through the tall, arched windows, a chill clung to the polished stone floors, carried on the silence that had swallowed every room. I sat between my parents in the grand hall, the same place where we used to gather every Thanksgiving. Except now, the only thing being carved was a legacy. A hush fell as the heavy doors creaked open, revealing the family one by one. Cressa, flawless in her cream blazer and diamond studs. Merrick, slick as always in a tailored suit that screamed confidence. Randall Alaric, arms crossed, his presence as sharp as his opinions. No one looked at me, not even my father, whose knee bounced beside mine, or my mother, whose knuckles turned white around the strap of her handbag. Then came Garson. Miles Garson, the longtime attorney of Edward Blackwell Sr., moved with a kind of solemn grace that warned everyone this was no ordinary reading. He stood at the head of the semicircle of chairs and adjusted his glasses with quiet precision. "Thank you all for coming," he said, voice calm but commanding. "As per the explicit instructions of the late Edward Blackwell Sr., we will begin with a statement, recorded shortly before his passing." Murmurs stirred like wind through dry leaves. A projector was wheeled in. Lights dimmed. I could feel the shift in the room, subtle but electric. Cressa leaned toward Merrick and whispered, "He recorded something?" He hated cameras. Merrick didn't respond. He only narrowed his eyes, calculating. When the screen lit up, everything stopped. There he was. My grandfather. Older than I remembered, the lines around his mouth deeper, his frame thinner, but his eyes, those eyes, still burned with clarity and weight. He sat in his old study chair, books and wood-paneled walls behind him. "If you're watching this," he began, "then I'm no longer around to look any of you in the eye, but make no mistake. I see you. I always have." You could have heard a pin drop. "I know what this family expects," he continued. "Wealth, influence, entitlement. You've treated my legacy like a buffet, each of you reaching for the juiciest portion, assuming your birthright was enough to earn it." Cressa shifted uncomfortably. Merrick's jaw tightened. Edward leaned forward slightly in the video. "Can any of you name who visited me most in my final months?" No one spoke, because no one could. I didn't move, didn't smile, just listened. "I'll tell you," he said. "It was Ivania. Not once or twice, but consistently, quietly, without press, without requests, without performance. She brought me lemon cookies and left her ego at the door." A sharp inhale from someone behind me. I didn't turn. I built Blackwell Industries with grit, sacrifice, and integrity, Edward continued, and I will not let it pass into the hands of those who squander it. The screen faded to black. Gasps rippled. Then silence. A silence that said more than shouting ever could. Garson cleared his throat. "We will now proceed to the official reading of the will," he said, producing a sealed envelope. I felt the room lean forward. Garson unfolded the paper with methodical care and then spoke. "By the last will and testament of Edward Blackwell Sr., the following provisions are to be honored." A pause. 51% controlling ownership of Blackwell Industries, all residential estates including the Savannah Mansion, Naples property, and Vermont Lakeside home, and the Edward Blackwell Family Fund, valued at $37 million, are hereby bequeathed to Ivania R. Blackwell. Time stopped. I didn't breathe. For a moment no one did. Then, "What?" Cressa's voice cracked. "That's insane!" Merrick stood abruptly. "This is a joke. I want to see that document right now." Randall slammed a fist on the table. "This is an outrage. Edward was not of sound mind toward the end." All around me, voices overlapped, accusations, disbelief, the crashing sound of certainty shattering. I sat still, centered. My pulse roared, but I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. My mother reached for my hand. Her fingers were trembling. My father looked like he'd seen a ghost. "You have to be kidding," Cressa snapped, stepping forward toward Garson. "She's not even on the board. She doesn't know how to run a company." "Have you ever discovered that the people who were supposed to protect you were the first to doubt you? That sting, when even your own family warns you not to hope. If that's ever been your truth, drop a number 7 in the comments. Now, let's see what happened when the will was finally read." Garson remained calm. "Everything will be made available for legal review, but the documentation is valid, and this will was verified by 3 independent legal teams prior to Mr. Blackwell's death." Merrick barked a cold laugh. "You realize we'll contest this, don't you? None of this is final." I turned to him for the first time. "You can try," I said evenly, "but I suggest you hear everything before you decide how far you're willing to go." It was the first time my voice cut through the room. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the person speaking. Maybe he didn't. Because I was no longer the girl who sat at the edge of photos, erased from toasts and agendas. I wasn't invisible anymore. And this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. They didn't waste time. Less than 48 hours after the will was read, I received my first official notice, a petition to pause the transfer of control, filed by Merrick Knox and co-signed by Randall Alaric. I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was the speed with which they regrouped, like the will reading had only been an opening move, and now they were ready for war. The temporary boardroom had been set up in the West Wing while renovations continued. A long, gleaming table stretched beneath modern pendant lights. The air smelled like lacquer and fresh carpet. New beginnings and old resentments. Garson was already seated at the head when I arrived. He nodded at me but said nothing. Across from him, Merrick tapped a thick folder on the polished wood with theatrical precision. Randall leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over a navy suit too crisp to be coincidence. Cressa wasn't there yet. I knew she'd make an entrance. She always did. "Glad you could join us," Merrick said without looking up. "I assume this is about the documents you filed," I said, taking the seat opposite him. Randall scoffed. "This is about cleaning up Edward's mess before you make it worse." Before I could reply, the doors opened and in walked Cressa. Cream silk pantsuit, perfectly calculated discomfort in her eyes. "Sorry," she said. "I had to triple-check my blood pressure. Apparently watching my legacy evaporate is bad for my health." She took the seat beside Merrick and laid out a manila folder like it was a weapon. Garson cleared his throat. "Let's begin. As you're all aware, The will has been certified, but challenges have been filed under the claim that Mr. Blackwell was not of sound mind and may have been subject to undue influence. I didn't flinch. I waited. Merrick stood. "This isn't personal, Ivania," he began, his voice oiled and smooth, "but we're talking about the future of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. You were never part of that future. Until last week you were— What? A community outreach coordinator? Until last week, I echoed. You were rerouting foundation funds into your own pocket. The temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. Cressa raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive, sliding it across the table to Garson. He looked at me. May I? Go ahead, I said. Garson inserted the drive into his laptop, and within seconds, a grainy but clear video filled the monitor. Merrick, sitting in a dim-lit office, leaning toward a contractor and whispering, "If you bump the markup 5%, I'll sign off and you cut me 10 back under consulting." Cressa shot to her feet. "This is illegal surveillance." Merrick's face went pale. "You had me recorded? That's entrapment." "That's your office's internal security feed, Merrick," I replied calmly. "I simply requested the footage as the new controlling stakeholder. You should have changed your passwords." Randall slammed a hand on the table. "Enough of this. You think a few edited clips are going to stop us?" "They're not edited," Garson said quietly, "and the metadata is intact." The room fell into a tense silence. "You want to talk credentials?" I continued. "I spent the last decade cleaning up the social responsibility division you let rot. I've worked in poverty law, nonprofit partnerships, and crisis mediation. You work spreadsheets. I work people." Cressa looked ready to pounce. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've turned this into a witch hunt." "No," I said, folding my hands. "I turned on a light. That's different." Randall narrowed his eyes. "You don't have the stamina for this. You think boardrooms bend to sentiment? You'll fold the first time a stockholder looks at you sideways." "I'm not here to impress stockholders," I replied. "I'm here to restore integrity. Something this family stopped valuing the minute it became inconvenient." Garson spoke again. "Given the nature of the materials presented, we'll need to begin a formal inquiry into board conduct. Mr. Knox and Ms. Malloy will be suspended from financial oversight pending that review." "What?" Cressa's voice spiked. "You can't suspend us." "I can," Garson said, "and I just did." The door opened behind me and Zephyr peeked in, holding up his phone with wide eyes. "You're trending," he mouthed. Of course we were. I rose from my chair. "This is the new standard," I said. "Accountability, transparency, real leadership." I looked across the table, at the men who had dismissed me, the cousin who had mocked me, the uncle who still saw me as a girl playing dress-up. Then I walked out. Let them scramble. I had a legacy to rebuild. It was time to show them the rest. The backlash after the board meeting had been fast and loud. Randall had stormed out before the vote on my temporary executive privileges. Cressa, ever the tactician, went radio silent, likely coordinating damage control with whatever PR firm she still had on retainer. Merrick filed another injunction within 24 hours, all predictable. What they didn't expect was that I had more. I'd waited for this moment, not because I needed vindication, but because the house my grandfather built had termites in its walls, and it was time to expose the rot. The main salon was packed, every seat taken by family, former board members, longtime staff, and even media, albeit discreetly. Zephyr had quietly set up a private stream, and I didn't stop him. If anyone deserved to witness what was coming, it was everyone. At the front stood a large projection screen. Miles Garson adjusted the remote in his hand as the murmurs settled. "This," he said, "is the final message from Edward Blackwell Sr. It contains personal observations, recorded over time and compiled at his direct request. I stood off to the side, hands clasped behind my back, trying not to let the pounding in my chest show. The lights dimmed. And then my grandfather appeared again. This time, not seated. He moved slowly across the frame, setting a camera down on a table. His voice came through as he adjusted the angle. "I've made my decision," he said, "and I know they won't accept it. So I'm leaving them no room to twist it." Then the video cut, to clip after clip, captured by hidden cameras or private records. Randall mocking long-serving employees behind closed doors, calling them dead weight. Cressa at a private event, laughing with managers as they discussed slashing employee benefits. They'll whine, but where else will they go? Merrick on the phone with a property developer. "Of course I'm inflating the appraisal, it's what they pay me for." Every face in the room had gone still. Even Garson looked stunned. He hadn't seen the full compilation. Then came Edward's voice again. "Some of you will claim these are out of context, but context isn't built in minutes. It's built over years." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Cressa stood now, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight I imagined she'd crack a molar. Merrick's usual polish was frayed, his leg bounced. Randall didn't move, but I saw the vein throbbing in his temple. The footage continued. Edward speaking candidly to the camera. "I made mistakes. I trusted people who used my name for their own gain. But the one thing I've learned in these final years, character isn't who you are in front of others. It's what you do when no one's watching." Then a surprise. The image faded briefly, and then came Miss Dartha, our longtime housekeeper. She looked directly into the lens, sitting in Edward's old chair. "He asked me to speak," she said gently. "Not to accuse, just to confirm." I blinked. I hadn't known she'd recorded anything. "Miss Avania," she continued, "never asked for a thing. Not once. She came because she cared. She listened. She stayed after everyone left. The rest of you..." She paused, eyes damp. "You only showed up when there was something to take." A shudder moved through the room. The screen went black. Silence fell like snowfall, soundless, suffocating. I stepped forward slowly. No podium, no microphone, just my voice. "You've seen the truth," I said. "Unfiltered, undeniable." Randall stood abruptly. "This is a stunt, an emotional manipulation." "No," I said, looking directly at him. "This is accountability." Cressa shook her head. "You think this makes you a leader?" "I think this makes me honest," I replied. "Something this family hasn't valued in a long time." Garson cleared his throat. "There will be a formal ethics investigation opened effective immediately." Merrick scoffed. "This is ridiculous." "It's documented," Garson said flatly. "And public?" Zephyr, phone still in hand, muttered, "It's already trending." "People are calling it the Blackwell Reckoning." Randall turned on him. "Turn that damn thing off." Zephyr didn't flinch. "Too late. Thousands are watching. Live." I turned toward the crowd. "We've lived behind polished doors for too long, pretending this family stood for legacy. But legacy without character is a hollow monument." A pause. "I don't need everyone here to like me, but I will not let this house rot any further." The staff in the back, men and women who'd cleaned, cooked, driven, and guarded for decades, stood a little taller. Garson nodded. "We're not finished," I said. "Not until the people who helped build this family are no longer treated as disposable. Not until truth is more than a show." The room didn't applaud. It listened. And for the first time, that was enough. This was it. The boardroom felt colder than usual. Glass walls gleaming, leather chairs aligned with military precision. The table stretched long and silent, already occupied by the key decision-makers of Blackwell Industries. A large monitor on the far wall displayed the company's logo in muted gray. Like it, too, was holding its breath. Garson sat at the head, flanked by the board's internal secretary and 2 legal observers. Every document had been prepared, every clause reviewed. Today, they would vote. The outcome wouldn't just decide who controlled the company, it would determine what kind of legacy Edward Blackwell had truly left behind. I stood near the end of the table, hands folded in front of me. I wore black. Not because I was mourning, but because it made me feel like stone. Untouchable. Cressa was already seated, arms folded, lips a thin line. She hadn't said a word to me since the video. Merrick arrived just behind her, files in hand, followed closely by Randall, whose silence was a greater threat than any of his speeches. "Let's be clear," Randall said once everyone was seated. "This vote isn't about punishing people, it's about stability." He looked around the room like a general surveying soldiers before a coup. "Miss Blackwell lacks corporate leadership experience. She's emotional, reactive, and the media circus she's stirred has done damage to our brand." Cressa nodded. "What investors want is predictability, not public shaming, not drama." I let them speak. Let them empty their arsenal. Then I rose, placing a simple folder in front of me. Inside was my strategic recovery plan: audits, department overhauls, community reinvestments, and ethical compliance measures. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Instead, I spoke. My grandfather believed that legacy meant more than numbers on a screen. He believed in people, and he believed in truth. I'm not here to run this company the way it was. I'm here to rebuild it into what it should have been all along. Cressa rolled her eyes. Let me guess, with hope and cookies. Some board members chuckled softly, unsure which way the wind would blow. Garson intervened. "Let's stay on topic," I continued, voice steady. "I've listened to every staff member who was silenced. I've read every internal complaint you buried. This isn't about revenge. It's about reform. If you want another year of lawsuits, resignations, and headline damage, vote for them. But if you want to restore trust in Blackwell, vote for something new." There was silence. One of the senior board members, a silver-haired woman named Ruth Lansing, leaned forward. "I watched the footage," she said, "and I remember the man Edward used to be. The way he built this from scratch with no shortcuts. What I saw this week wasn't just strategy. It was integrity." She looked at me. "You have my vote." Randall scoffed. "This is sentimental nonsense." "No," Ruth replied. "This is the first real leadership I've seen in 10 years. Garson cleared his throat. "We will now begin the formal vote of confidence." As the final votes were cast and silence settled in, I noticed a few things that told me the shift was deeper than just a tally. At the far end of the room, a junior executive, one of the quiet analysts who usually stayed buried in data sheets, leaned toward a colleague and whispered. She didn't even flinch. That's leadership. Across from him, a middle-aged board member named Alan Chi, someone who had remained neutral throughout every prior discussion, finally gave a slow, approving nod. He didn't raise his hand first, but when he did, it sent a ripple. Others followed. Even beyond the glass wall, just outside the boardroom, I caught sight of one of the janitorial staff, Brenda, watching from the hallway, mop still in hand. Our eyes met briefly. She smiled. Not the polite kind, the kind that meant, "It's about damn time." The weight of those small gestures grounded me more than the final count. Have you ever had to stand in a room full of power, knowing no one believed in you until you proved them wrong? That quiet fire of claiming what's already yours. If that moment speaks to you, leave a number 9 in the comments. Now, let's witness what happens when the silent one takes the lead. When the final hand rose, Garson nodded. "By board majority," he announced, "Ivania Blackwell is hereby confirmed as CEO of Blackwell Industries, effective immediately. My lungs finally remembered how to breathe. I nodded once, not to thank them, but to acknowledge what came next. Merrick slammed his folder shut. Randall stood without a word and walked out. Cressa hesitated, then followed, heels clicking like a funeral procession. I didn't watch them leave. Instead, I turned to the glass wall and looked out over the skyline. I thought of my grandfather's hands, calloused from work before they ever signed contracts. I thought of the staff still cleaning floors and logging hours while this vote happened. And I thought of what it meant to inherit a legacy not just with ink, but with fire. My fire. "We'll begin transition meetings tomorrow," Garson said. I nodded again. But inside, something steadier was rising. Resolve sharpened into clarity. I wasn't done. This was only the foundation. The rebuilding had just begun. The mansion was quiet again. Not the quiet of absence, but the quiet of aftermath. Of something broken, now at rest. I stood alone in the grand hallway, the stained glass above casting colored light on the marble floor, just as it had when I was a child. But today, the silence didn't carry exclusion. It carried closure. The final meetings had wrapped. Garson's transition files were with the legal team. The media trucks had pulled back beyond the gates. Merrick had withdrawn his last challenge. Randall, for once, had nothing to say. And Cressa hadn't been seen in 48 hours. I didn't need to chase any of them. I had too much to build. But before the rebuilding came the reckoning. Inside me. I walked slowly through the East Wing, past portraits of men and women who had worn the Blackwell name like armor. Most never knew I existed. Some had forgotten me on purpose. That was fine. Their gaze didn't haunt me anymore. I passed a mirror and caught my reflection. Tired, but still standing. In the kitchen, Miss Dartha was wiping down the counter. She looked up as I entered and smiled, soft and knowing. "You did good, honey," she said, pulling me into a hug. For a moment, I let myself lean into her warmth. The kind of comfort that didn't come from winning, but from surviving. "He knew," she added. "Mr. Edward, he knew you'd carry it right." I nodded, the lump in my throat tightening. Later, we sat down to dinner, just three of us. My mother Lorene, my father Orville, and me. No caviar, no champagne, just hot stew, bread still warm, and water in tall glasses. It was quiet, but not strained. Honest. "I never imagined it would end like this," my father said, finally looking me in the eyes. "Neither did I replied. My mother placed her spoon down gently. "We were proud of you today, Ivania," she said. "We just never knew how to say it." I smiled faintly. "You just did." Outside, the wind stirred the hedges. Inside, the old clock ticked in calm rhythm. We didn't need more words. Some wounds still needed time, but we were sitting at the same table now, and that was something. After the dishes were cleared, I stepped out onto the front porch. The sky was deep navy, stars blinking like secrets only I could hear. I pulled my coat tight and breathed in the cool air. Footsteps behind me. It was my mother. She didn't speak right away. Just stood beside me, hands tucked in her sleeves. "Do you think we'll be okay?" she asked softly. I looked out at the dark horizon, the lawn, the woods, the press lights no longer flashing. "I think we'll make it through." We stood there a while in silence. No performance, no image to maintain. Just a mother and daughter trying to find each other again. Eventually, she touched my arm lightly. "Come inside, Ivania. You need rest." I nodded and followed her in. That night, I lay in the guest bedroom, the one no one used, but which had always felt more like home to me than any other. The events of the last week played again in my head. The video, the accusations, the vote, the silence that followed. But more than that, I felt something else. The ache of relationships changed, perhaps forever. The clarity of who stayed, the weight of what I now held. Some things I'd lost for good, but others were finally mine. The next morning, the ripple effects had already begun. In the breakfast nook, Zephyr was hunched over his tablet, scrolling with wide eyes. He looked up as I entered, the light from the screen reflecting in his glasses. "We're still trending," he said. "Not just locally. Global finance boards are picking it up. People are actually calling you the quiet heiress who rewrote the boardroom rulebook." I blinked. "Seriously?" He grinned. "One comment said you pulled a checkmate in silk armor. It's wild." Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part just stood there, stunned. I hadn't done this to be seen, but being seen still meant something. Later that afternoon, I visited the West Wing offices where the internal team was packing up some of Edward's files. Among them was Clara, one of the admin coordinators who'd worked under Merrick for years. When she saw me, she paused, then walked over. "I don't mean to intrude," she said quietly, "but thank you for making this place feel safe again." Her words hit harder than any headline, and I knew then this was why I stayed. That night, after dinner, I returned again to the notebook. But before I could write anything more, I flipped back to one of Edward's old pages, his handwriting precise and steady. "Legacy is not what you leave behind, it's what you pass forward, on purpose." I stared at the line for a long time, then picked up my pen. Below Phase 2, I wrote, "With purpose." At the top, I wrote, "Phase 2." And then I smiled. I didn't need to script the rest tonight. Tomorrow would come. But I knew this. I wasn't rebuilding to prove anything to the ones who left. I was building for the ones who stayed. After everything, I didn't just survive the storm. I walked out of it with my head held high, my heart steady, and a legacy rebuilt by my own hands. No longer was I the one left out of the room. Now, I set the table. I've learned this. Justice may come late, but when it arrives, it speaks for itself. Quiet strength, kindness placed where it matters, and refusing to shrink. These are what make those who once doubted you fall silent and watch. What about you? Have you ever stood in front of people who thought you'd never be strong enough to rise? What helped you through that moment? Or are you still waiting to take your stand? Share your story in the comments, because your voice might be the one someone out there needs to hear right now. And if you've ever been underestimated or pushed out of the game, don't miss the next video. I'll tell you about someone who was forgotten, and how she turned that silence into her sharpest weapon.